What is going on, everyone? Today I'm going to show you how to replace the tie rod assembly on your 99 to 04 Jeep Grand Cherokee.
The first step is going to be jack the front axle up in the center with a jack, and then put a jack stand on each side under the axle tube, like so. And then we're going to remove the wheels, which, if they're factory lug nuts, should be a 3/4 inch socket, otherwise a 19 millimeter will work. If you do not have an impact, air impact or cordless impact to take these wheels off, you'll want to crack the lug nuts loose before jacking up the Jeep. Otherwise, it's going to spin when you try to loosen them. If you've already jacked it up and you have a second person sitting around, they can hit the brakes to keep the wheel from spinning so you can loosen the lug nuts. Alright, so you don't have to do this, but I find it makes it a little bit easier. I turned the ignition to the on position, didn't start the Jeep, just to the on position, so I could turn the steering wheel all the way to the left. I'm going to start by removing the driver's side tie rod end. That way we can still use the steering wheel to turn the passenger side, since the tie rod connects to that knuckle. So what we're going to do is, I like to use a side cutter to get the cotter pin removed. If it's rusty, it's just going to break off no matter what you do, but I try to get a bite on it and kind of wiggle it to break it free. As you can see there, it cut right through it, so this one might not be coming out so nice. Nope. If it's not coming out, just trim it as short as you possibly can so we can get a socket on this thing. I advise wearing safety glasses if you have to cut this, because as you can see, chunks are flying. Alright, now this should be a 3/4 or a 19 millimeter socket. You may have to use a hammer to pound the socket on if you had to cut the cotter pin like me, just because you're probably not going to be able to get it cut perfectly flush. And we're going to try to break it free from what's left of the cotter pin. Looks like it's starting to come off. I'm going to switch to my cordless. All right, now you want to be careful when you're hitting this out like that. If you're hitting it too hard and it's not coming out, it'll start to mushroom, and then you might not be able to fit it through here. So if it's being really stubborn and starting to mushroom, I recommend you hit kind of on the end of the knuckle here, or from the sides of the knuckle. That will kind of send a shock wave through here and try to bust any rust free that's seizing this stud to the knuckle. So now we're gonna go ahead, we can move this freely, it's not attached anymore. Now we can turn the wheel the other way and go undo the passenger side tie rod end. All right, so on this side, it looks like the cotter pin is actually cooperating a little bit. Now that I set it, it'll probably break. Just kind of keep biting it, prying, and reposition it. Walk it out like that. Yep, it broke in one spot. Keep going. Alright, so I was able to get the full pin out on this side. I'm going to go ahead and crack it free. Just need a little tap here. Oh, old nut was stuck in there. Now, one tip of advice, if you're loosening this and it seems like the whole stud is spinning inside the tie rod end, in other words, you're spinning and spinning and spinning, but the nut's not loosening, what you'll have to do is probably get a jack underneath the tie rod end to create upward pressure. Since the tie rod end is a tapered stud, it may have come down a little bit and it's just spinning in there. So if you put weight under it, pressure upwards on it, it'll create more contact patch and grab better, so you can loosen this thing up. All right, now I should have told you to do this before dropping the last tie rod end. So I apologize if you're at this part and struggling, but we do need to remove the bolt and nut for the steering stabilizer shock. This is a 15mm nut, and you can get a 19mm wrench on the back side here to hold it. Ours did not want to come apart so nice. It felt like I was going to snap the stud. So I used some MAP gas here to heat it up. You can use just the blue propane torch too. It just doesn't get as hot, but definitely don't want to break that bolt because it's a special bolt. You'd have to go to the dealer probably to get a new one or order it online. But we have it now. I want to grab it by hand because it's still hot. There we go. And gonna have to remove the stud out of the little clamp here, and it might help to use the wrench on the back side to spin it if you need to. I ended up putting this end of the tie rod back up just to keep, because the rod wanted to spin when I was holding the wrench and trying to loosen the nut. So if you're having issues there, you may have to reinstall like I did. Ta-da! And you can see here why we're changing it. Probably can't tell now, but this thing had quite a bit of play. And we're talking an 1/8 to 1/4 inch. All right, so here's our new parts for the tie rod assembly. We got the tube. You can reuse the tube. It's just a headache to try and get it apart when it's rusty. You're gonna have a lot of cussing and swearing. It's just not really worth the time, in my opinion. So if you can afford it, just get a new tube. We got a new tube from Rock Auto just because it's just that, a tube. Doesn't need to be anything special. The ends are Moog. I recommend going with OEM or Moog if you're gonna go aftermarket, because those are your two best options. I've gone the cheap way on ball joints and tie rod ends before, with like the Master Pro from O'Reilly, and they just don't hold up more than like 10-20,000 miles. So you're gonna have one side's gonna be reverse thread and one side's gonna be normal thread. The end that has 2 clamps on it, one of them is for your stabilizer that we had to unhook. That's gonna be your passenger side. So the passenger side is gonna be normal thread, so righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. The driver side is gonna be reverse. It's gonna be lefty-tighty, righty-loosey. I recommend taking some anti-seize and putting a little bit on the threads before you get going, just to help with adjustability, make the toe easier for the alignment, and also if you ever have to take this apart again, it shouldn't rust together. I will post product links in the video description for the ends, the tube, anti-seize, everything we're using in this video. Basically, I'll have product links for. I will list Moog, OEM, and maybe some cheaper options as well. So again, judging by this one, this is normal threads. So that means righty-tighty. On the passenger side, which has the two. So we're just gonna get started. And then we can switch to the other side and do the same thing. I highly recommend using gloves if you're gonna be using anti-seize, because it's like cancer. If it gets on one thing, it spreads everywhere else. If you touch one thing, you're gonna end up getting it everywhere. So this is your warning. All right, so again, the driver's side is reversed, lefty-tighty. All right, now our new Moog ends are greasable. So we're gonna go ahead and put the grease fittings in now. Be careful when you're handling the tie rod after this. You don't wanna snap these off. They are pretty brittle. These, I believe, are like a 7mm. I don't have the proper size socket right now, so I'm just gonna use a channel lock or a pliers to tighten it. They don't need to be anything ridiculously tight. Just don't grab on the rounded part here, because that's where the grease gun is gonna need to grab on. All right, there we go, nice and snug. Doesn't need to be anything too tight. Don't want to snap them off. All right, so since the new ones have grease fittings and the old ones don't, it makes it a little hard. Normally I would measure from grease fitting to grease fitting and set these to the same length, but we can't do that on these, so I'm kind of just lining them up so that the tie rod end studs are lined up with each other straight, just to get it close. You want to keep it symmetrical. You don't want like this end screwed in all the way and this end only screwed in halfway. You want to keep it about the same, so I've threaded them both in the same distance so far. Now I'm just gonna spin the tube basically to adjust it. I'm gonna put it in the Jeep now. We have it pretty close here, so we're gonna put it up, tighten the nuts on each end, and then we can kind of adjust it from there. All right, so if you have any loose rust or debris on here, knock that off so the nut actually gets a nice flat surface to tighten up against. And then we'll lift this into place. And put your new castle nuts on. All right, now I don't have a torque spec on these. I would guess no more than probably like 40 foot-pounds, 45 max. Just want to get them tight. If you don't have a torque wrench, just get it so that you'll feel it kind of bottom out. It'll get tighter suddenly and just go a little bit beyond that. You don't want it coming loose or anything. And then you can see that there's a hole in the stud. So you'll need to continue rotating the nut until it's tight and also lines up with one of the notches in the nut. So as you can see there, now I can get my cotter pin through the hole. Now, my preference with cotter pins is push it all the way through, so you can see the head of it here will be resting in the notch on the back side of the castle nut. And I keep pressure there on the head, and then I take and lift one side up. This one I'll push down so it'll kind of hold the nut in place. And then I'll take and bend this one back. You can use a pliers or a side cutter like we did to remove it. And I try to get it over the top of the stud. It's not the prettiest thing in the world, but it does a pretty good job of holding everything in place. That's the full finished product. It's a little more than you need to do, but I I just like mine to be super tight. I've bent it up and over the stud, and then use like a little screwdriver to punch this corner down there, so it barely even wiggles at all. It's pretty snug. Nothing is moving. So now is a good time to grease your tie rod ends. You'll notice eventually the rubber, obviously this is only if you got greasable ends, but eventually the rubber will start ballooning slowly. Like that. As soon as it starts ballooning, you're basically good. You don't want to overinflate it because, as you can see, it kind of oozes around the knuckle here. You don't want the knuckle to dig into it when you're turning. And if you overfill it, or if the knuckle cuts into it, the grease will start pouring out of the rubber boot here, and your new tie rod end is basically junk because it's going to let all the lubricant out. So you don't want to overdo it. As soon as it starts ballooning like that, you're good. Do the same on the other side. It's also a good idea to hit your upper and lower ball joints at this time if they're greasable, since the wheel is off and you can get to them. Alright, so both tie rod ends are up, tightened, cotter pins installed, greased. So now we're going to go ahead and reinstall the stabilizer, but we're not going to fully tighten it yet because we still have to spin the tube to do the alignment, unless you're bringing it to a shop. But you can save yourself about $100 on an alignment if you do it yourself, which it's pretty easy on a solid axle like this. We will show you at the end here. So if you have a new tube like us, there's a bolt that comes on the clamp, but as you can see, it's not the same style bolt, so it's not going to work. And this is already attached to our stabilizer, so we're just going to use the old one. Rotate this forward, fight it to get it on. Alright, so I checked it quick, and although the bolt is not correct for this, the nut is the same thread pitch. And since our old nut was rusty and didn't want to come off nice, and the new nut has this nice, basically like lock nut feature on it, we're going to use that instead. Again, I'm not going to fully tighten this down though, because we still need to spin the tie rod tube to the alignment. If you are bringing it to do an alignment, I would fully tighten this now at this time. Same with the clamps for the ends themselves, one on each side. Again, it's a 3/4 to hold the stabilizer, and a 15 mil for the nut. It should kind of want to rest in a neutral position as far as position for the stabilizer. As you can see, it kind of just returns to center on its own if it's not off by too much. But basically you want the stud that goes through the stabilizer to be going perfectly parallel to the ground, front to back, just like it is right here. All right, now we're ready to reinstall the wheels. Again, remember, it should be a 3/4 inch socket or a 19 mil for the lug nuts. What I like to do is put one on and then skip one and go to the next one, and then I'll snug them down with the impact just gently. With 2 of them on there, it should be pretty well centered, but I'll do a 3rd one. And then I'll finish putting the last 2 in, and I'll get them tight with the impact, and then I'll lower it down and we'll torque the lug nuts. All right, now you're going to torque your lug nuts to 100 to 120 foot-pounds, and you're going to want to, again, go in kind of a star pattern. I go every other lug nut until I've gone around once, and then I'll do just kind of like a circle all the way around to hit them all again, because once you torque them the first time, they usually spin a little bit more the second time around. And then you're going to want to retorque your wheels after 50 to 100 miles worth of driving. All right, now if you're interested in setting your own toe adjustment, which is just like the pitch that the tires are angled inward, you want to have it about
a 1/16 of an inch, give or take, a 1/16 to an 1/8 roughly. So a way to do that on a solid axle like this without an alignment rack is you take like a piece of masking tape and you make a mark on it like that, and you'll stick it to the center of the tire as high as you can without getting in the way, because what we're gonna have to do is do this same thing on the other side steer tire, and we're gonna need 2 people to hold a tape measure nice and tight from this mark across to the other one. So you need to be able to go across the bottom of the Jeep with the tape measure. So you'll notice I have the tape slightly below the lower control arm, so that doesn't interfere. What I've done is I backed the Jeep out of the garage a good 30 feet and then pulled it back forward so the suspension is loaded up in the direction that it's going to be moving going down the road. And we're going to measure from the mark on this tire across to the other side, and then we're going to pull the Jeep forward until the tape rotates around to the front side of the tire, and we're going to measure across again. And what we're shooting for is to have the measurement on the front side of the tire to be just slightly smaller. Again, 1/16 to an 1/8 inch. That measurement should be 1/16 to an 1/8 inch shorter than the back measurement. So we want the front of the wheels pointed towards each other just a little bit. All right, so we've done our measurement across the rear of the tires. Another thing I wanted to point out is I don't usually use the end of the tape measure just because you get this going on, kind of inaccurate. So we measure at the 1 inch mark. So we measured it from the 1 inch mark. That's where we line up the first line. The other tire line was at 61 1/8. So now I'm going to pull the Jeep forward so that the tape is on the front side. We're going to do our measurement again. Again, I'm going to start at the 1 inch mark, and if it's adjusted properly, it should be 61 inches, because that would be an 1/8 inch less than the 61 1/8 on the back. I have a feeling we're going to have to do more adjustments. It's probably not going to be in spec our first try, but ideally that's how it'll end up. All right, so we have some adjustments to do. The rear measurement again was 61 1/8. The front measurement was 60 5/8. So right now it's towed in 5/8, which is too much. So what we have to do is I use a pipe wrench or a monkey wrench, however you want, to rotate the tie rod tube that we just installed. We're gonna go underneath, and remember, the passenger side is your normal threads. So if you rotate the tie rod this direction, it should shorten it, and if you rotate it this direction, it should lengthen it. I like to do little bits at a time though. You know, we're only off by 5/8, and probably one or maybe 2 revolutions, full revolutions of the tube is going to get us there. So don't want to overdo it, just do small adjustments. All right, now as I explained earlier, you want to have the suspension loaded up, which means you're going to want to back up like a good 30 feet so that you can pull forward 20 feet so that the toe and the caster and camber and the weight of the vehicle and everything is moving the direction it's going to be going down the road is all loaded up to the geometry it's going to be at. That way you're getting the most accurate measurement possible. So we're going to back it all the way up, pull it forward, measure our rear measurement, and then pull it forward and get our front measurement again. All right, so after about 5 attempts, we finally got the toe set properly. It's just about perfect at 1/16 inch towed in at the front. Our final numbers ended up being 61 1/8 in the back. Again, we're starting at the 1 inch mark, so technically that's 60 1/8. And then in the front, it was 61 1/16, technically 60 1/16. So once we have the toe set properly, you want to make sure your adjuster collars are centered properly here, and make sure that they're orientated to where they're not going to hit anything. There's plenty of room here, so when the steering moves, we're not going to hit anything. And then you're going to want to zip these down again, 15 millimeter.
Again, doesn't have to be anything too ridiculously tight. You're gonna have to use your best judgment here. If you're gonna use like a torque wrench, I probably wouldn't go past about 30. It just needs to be tight to where it's pinching the clamp that the bolt goes through, and therefore it's pinching the tube a little bit where these slots are cut, so that it can't free spin on here when you're going down the road and get out of adjustment. There we go, both tie rod end clamps are tightened. Now the final step is to position your steering stabilizer. Again, like I said, the bolt should be running back and forth, so just like it is now. And we're gonna go ahead, tighten that down, 15 mil for the nut, 3/4 inch wrench on the back side here to hold the stud. All right, that wraps up this video. If this video helped you out, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell notification button for more videos like this, and make sure to check me out on Facebook at Tony the Truck Guy. Thanks for watching.